Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Afade, Tero, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry. Our guests today are Mary Fem Urena, Coastal Planner with the Division of Coastal Resources Management, and also Kianna Reyes. She's an intern with the program and an NMC Northern Marianas College student. And we're here to talk today about the Shoreline Monitoring Program, or I would say in more common wordage, erosion in Saipan. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us, Catherine.
I'm glad we could spend time talking about what is science for you guys, but also what is something I think quite emotional for those of us from the islands, which is shoreline erosion. Maybe you could start us off telling us, what is the Shoreline Monitoring Project all about?
So the Division of Coastal Resources Management under the Bureau of Environmental Coastal Quality started the Shoreline Monitoring Program. It is funded by NOAA's Office of Coastal Management, and the idea really is to assess shoreline erosion on beaches in Saipan, Tinian, and Rota, and also Maniagaha. With me is Kianna Reyes. She is one of our most recent interns. Interns have been, I would say, fundamental to ensuring that we continue this program, because the protocol that we employ requires 3 people, and as I lead it, I need that extra capacity. So Kianna has been really important in that, as well as the other interns that have come our way when we started the program in 2016.
Mm-hmm. So you've been monitoring 16 sites, I understand, from Wing Beach in Marpi all the way down the western coastline to Pukpuk Beach.
Yes. In
San Antonio. Kianna, you have had a particular concern in assisting with this program about how shoreline erosion affects indigenous communities like ours. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so shoreline erosion affects all coastal communities, regardless if it's indigenous or not. But my particular concern is that a lot of indigenous communities, especially when you're talking in relations to the islands, where erosion might affect them even harder than people who are in the States and have the room to relocate. This is particularly a concern because, well, especially with climate change, it's exacerbating the issue even more, and rising sea levels are not going to do anything positive for the rate of erosion. So when you're tying that into looking at the effects it has on indigenous communities, it's obviously going to be disproportionate to the effects that it might share with people who are maybe in areas with more landmass, like the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there are indigenous communities there, but there are also indigenous communities there who are coastal, and a lot of their practices and traditions are intrinsically tied with being coastal communities.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that's very dear to their hearts as people who have a very shaky claim to some lands. So it's a particularly sensitive issue, and one that we're hoping to help mitigate somewhat.
So true, like we're here especially, we're so tied to our land.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we're so tied to the ocean. We have memories of when we were a kid going to Micro Beach, and now the beach is 100 yards, I feel 100 yards closer than it was, when I was a kid. So definitely it's very obvious that there is a more significant impact to communities like ours, even though it is a worldwide problem. So I understand from your research that of these 16 sites, about half of them seem okay, no change, stable. And then what's happening with the other half?
So from what we were seeing, Kianna, do you have your Research project?
Yes, so I'm just referring to my notes down
Go
on my
ahead.
phone.
You worked hard for those notes.
Thank you so
She
much.
updated our data. So, and she has a wonderful poster that's going to be showcased at UOG's.
Yeah, the sustainability conference that's occurring from April 9th to April 13th, if I'm not mistaken, and it's in Guam, the University of Guam, at Hyatt.
Okay.
So yes, for a lot of the measured sites, so for 16 sites, we've had 43 measured transects. 21.
Wait, what does that mean in plain English?
Okay, so
Measured transect means?
So, transect is kind of a little bit hard to explain. It's when we find a head stake, and what a head stake
What's a head stake?
Is a point. It's like a point at a beach, a selected landmark, which could be like a tree or a log. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Or like a pillar, and we establish this line on the ground that's going from the transect or the head stake to the beach, about like 10 feet or so off the water line.
Like high water mark?
You could say so, yes.
Okay.
So wherever the water, at the time, the tides change, right?
Yes.
So a beach can be much shorter when it's high tide and much longer when it's low tide. And, some of these beaches, they have that really interesting tidal difference.
Yes.
But I tell my interns, first hit the toe. So there's a feature where it's kind of like a little bit of a indentation.
Yes.
Past where the usual water line would be, average water line. But that beach toe would be exposed during low tide.
Okay.
But I encourage them to try to get that elevation using the equipment and distance, and then go 10 feet more.
Okay, higher up. Okay. So what did you find at the other half of the sites where there was changes? What's going on there?
Well, sometimes changes can be influenced by channel movements and wave energies, or also storms. So when they bring in like huge spurts of rain, the water washes down and sort of carries away the sediment or the sand into the ocean. So those are natural changes. Sometimes those changes are matched. So when they're matched, sand comes in through wave energies and it builds up the shore. So when they're like that, and the sediment going in is the same as the amount of sediment going out, that's called a stable shoreline. So nothing really goes on there, but when it's eroding, you can visibly see the difference in transects such as Hyatt, where people right now might be able to tell if the shoreline has changed 5 years ago.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We can tell.
Yes.
So basically, if I understand your research correctly, about a quarter of those sites are having very obvious erosion. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about where some of those major sites are. Hyatt, you mentioned. They've, I think, lost their volleyball court. What are some of the other places you're seeing major changes on the western shoreline?
Well, for me, major changes in regards to erosion, or just...
Yes.
Okay, so for erosion, Hyatt might be the most obvious one. I know that there is erosion alongside a certain shoreline in Micro Beach. And you might be able to see that because when you see like the rosewood trees near the water facing Maniagaha, you might be able to see some of the water creeping up and like...
exposing the roots and stuff?
Exposing the roots,
Yes.
burying the sidewalks, and you might not even be able to tell that there was a sidewalk there. And that is all that I really remember in regards to noticeable changes alongside beaches that have more recreational activity. And yeah, I'm sure there are other more noticeable changes around the other shorelines, but I've only really, me as just a person, I just go to Hyatt and Micro Beach, and those are the beaches I frequent the most. So
Let's talk a little bit about what are the not human impacts, but what are the impacts on human activity as a result of this erosion? The first thing that comes to mind for me, other than recreation, recreational areas, is like fishing, fisheries. Is this erosion affecting our fish population, do you think? Or bird habitat also, bird nesting habitat?
So one really important coastal resource that we like to think of, or habitat that's being destroyed unfortunately, is the shearwater nesting habitat in Manugaha. So Manugaha has seen really severe erosion on the eastern side. And I heard that it was because they removed one of the, I think it's a barge.
Okay, there was a wreck there, or
there was a
something?
wreck
Yeah.
there, and when they removed it, sometime in the 90s, I think, the sand shifted. So the interesting thing about sediment and how it moves is that it's such a sensitive system. So anything that happens in our lagoon can impact how the sediment moves. And it's really interesting to see that happen with Micro Beach and Hyatt and even Crown Plaza, the rate of erosion that's happening. But yet, we think about erosion, right? But we don't think about accretion, which is the opposite, when the beach actually grows. Observations are actually very important. A lot of the folks that we interact with, they can be fishermen or just residents who frequent the beach that have had prior experience of the shoreline. Some of them have shared with me that some beaches have grown since they were kids. But these beaches are more so in the southern side of the island. But I start thinking about, okay, that area, Crown Plaza, Hyatt area, we've noticed through our data that down south, Gran Vero, has anyone noticed that that beach is a little bit longer than usual? Like, that beach has been growing based on our data that we've been collecting. And then AMP, if you go a little bit more north towards where the Smiling Cove Marina is, those are actually new beaches. So the sand is moving somewhere. And I think that's the problem. Is, there are places that are growing, and then somehow the areas that were of high use are being, really impacted.
That's where we see it missing the most, is where it's eroding from. We may not notice where it's being deposited.
Right.
Speaking specifically about the Saipan Lagoon, what, in your observation, is the main cause of the erosion? Is it global warming? Is it seasonal? Is it La Nina pushing the waves to this side of the ocean? Is it the dredging of the channel a number of years ago?
That's so funny because those are really good factors. Theories, factors. That's why I love hearing people's observations, because especially those who have lived longer than I have, to see the changes, because those are great questions that might have great influence. They've said that when that channel, the Saipan channel, has been dredged in the 90s, a lot of sand were deposited towards Micro Beach area. That's one story I heard, but I haven't seen it for myself, obviously. But that channel does have an impact on, the dynamics of that particular area, that particular stretch, because it allows higher wave energies to enter into our lagoon, and it just exacerbates the sediment movement along the shoreline, whether it be increasing the beach or, increasing the loss. So it's a very interesting thing because there are many features in this dynamic system that we can't necessarily put a finger to until we get an expert on it.
Well, the good news is we hope to have an expert. We are talking about the shoreline monitoring project of the Division of Coastal Resources Management today, and we'll be back with more after this break.
Hafaday, Zantiro. I'm Leo Pangilinan with the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. We'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors who have made possible the many programs in our community like this show. We couldn't have done it without them. And if you value the work we do and would like to make a contribution to our efforts, we ask that you consider making an in-kind or cash contribution to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Any amount is appreciated, and donations of up to $5,000 qualify for an educational tax credit. We appreciate your partnership and support. Sidus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. Mary Fem, well, actually, no, I wanted to ask you, Kianna, if you could share a little bit about your experience being an intern with this project, even though it was only for 3 months. What was that like?
Well, the very first month was actually, there were a lot of little issues with scheduling because we were full-time students at the time. My partner was Christopher Pangilinan, and he had helped me with this study. We were working alongside each other underneath Mary Fem Urena, and she was a very patient mentor.
I was just so happy to have them.
The extra hands.
Yes,
Yeah.
the extra hands.
Yeah. What has meant the most to you being a part of going out and measuring stuff, and what has it meant to you?
It's meant a lot. I got to see a lot of the people who are there daily. So when you're going to the sites, you're not only observing the sites, but you're observing the people around you. And we have actually run into fishermen, which is like with the rod and reel or with the talaza, and they'd just be around the coast throwing their nets in. Mm-hmm. And they would talk to us sometimes and say like, oh, you're the new interns, because they've been around that long that they know the previous interns before us. So it's really nice seeing the community that who are actually using those sites on a daily basis, observing people who are studying, are in the scientific field, studying the shorelines and making sure that the transects are all looking all right and there are no projected problems in the near future for them to go through. So yeah, that connection with the community was very key to my experience, I think.
Well, that's great since you're passionate about the topic and all that. Mary Fem, we do want to talk about mitigation options, but before we do that, could we maybe talk a little bit more about, what this loss of property, for example, or land or shoreline really means for us as an island community, whether it be the impact on tourism, economic, or otherwise. What are some of the human impacts of this loss of shoreline?
It's been a very challenging issue pressing for coastal zone management because, it's a naturally occurring process, but with climate change, it's been increasing at such a fast rate. During the time I started, we've seen such fast, quick loss. And we have had studies that looked into assessing these beaches as well, looking into mitigation options. But it has been challenging to, of course, find, to understand this very dynamic system, to looking towards a more permanent solution. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to give up. We're doing our best to scope out what the future holds. So right now, the Division of Coastal Resource Management is supporting the Office of Planning and Development. Mm-hmm. They acquired FEMA's Building Infrastructure and Resilient Communities. It's a grant to scope out that area from Micro Beach all the way down to the Daiichi drainage area, so that Garapan shoreline. And they're going to be contracting out with this funding to get the expertise we need, to engineering expertise, to be able to understand the system and also help choose more long-term mitigation options. Mm-hmm. So yeah, And I think our data will be helpful. We will be, as we support them, we will be providing that data and also the expertise that we have.
What are we looking at in terms of timeline? I mean, that's almost, I know that's a difficult question to answer at the same time, because it really depends on which mitigation option you may choose, and apparently there's also a lot of disagreement about which option might be better. And we haven't even done the study. Wow, I'm just putting a lot of stuff on your shoulders right now, Mary Fem.
I understand, and actually with the conversations we've had with residents, they would propose ideas, and you would just listen to their experiences and also what they think, what are their visions for the use of that shoreline area. In my time, I actually developed a Living Shorelines and Nature-Based Solutions guidebook. That's a guide just to kind of explain about coastal dynamics in a more easier to understand context, because we actually do not want to replicate the issues that are happening when people decide to armor their shoreline without actually thinking about the long-term impacts.
Like, for example, seawalls. I've heard sometimes there's a negative impact because of seawalls. What would that be? What might that look like?
So with a seawall, what it does is that it drowns the beach. Beaches, they naturally, a healthy beach would want to come back. They will receive that sediment during a season where, there are gentle waves that would come in and bring in that sediment. But with the seawall, what they've been seeing in Hawaii and even Puerto Rico are that those beaches get lost indefinitely, because when the waves come in, they pretty much start scraping that elevation of beach, and it becomes deep. So seawalls can have that adverse effect on beaches.
Okay.
That can be challenging. So that's why we have this guidance, and it's available in our office. But we're not totally opposed to the idea of structural options, because it might be helpful, but we just want, as regulatory environmental agency, for folks to think about the impacts. And with that, we want people to start thinking about their visions. Like, what do you want micro beach to look like even with sea level rise? These are very challenging questions, and I think that it takes a community to come together and really start planning right now.
We can't afford to wait any longer.
We cannot afford to wait any longer, and there will be a lot of challenges along the way, but in 30 years' time, we don't know how our shorelines are going to look like. But with the assessment that we're having, we can make projections. So if the rate of erosion is, increasing with these high sea level events that we've been having with the La Nina, that is kind of a sneak peek into the future, like with the erosion issue. And with that, we have to also, with the plans that we have to make, right? We can make those decisions on what kind of measure we want to take. But we always want to be cognizant about use. Like, what is this beach used for? Once we have a seawall here, are we going to still have access to the beach as we did before? So speaking about short term, what the government is trying to do is that we are looking towards seeing how with our, very finite resources, funding, labor, how we can work together to just temporarily stabilize the beach.
What might that look like?
Well, I can't really say for now, but in some places they do sandbagging.
Okay, I've heard that being talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, sandbagging. It's not a permanent solution. It's very temporary, and the worst that could happen is that that sand gets ripped off because the lifespan is short, maybe 3-5 years. So it's good because it's not going to jeopardize any federal funding source that might actually propose a more long-term solution. So we want to think about that, but it's always difficult to think about the future and that change. Even myself, I get really emotional. How about you, Kianna?
Oh yeah, it's something that's very dear to my heart with other communities as well. So it is something that we take very seriously when we're trying to study these shorelines.
That's a good point. I mean, we're talking a lot about science today, but really for the everyday person, it's a personal thing, like concern, right, for our islands, and sadness also that, you know, things aren't the way they used to be or as beautiful as they used to be. And talking about, you know, mitigation options, I know that when, like, for example, the Saipan Beach Pathway was built, and that was also I believe largely funded by a lot of business donations. You know, we see now, I don't know, 15, 20 years later that has helped protect Beach Road from, you know, the big storms that we've had. And that was kind of like an accidental, kind of like first line of defense for our roads. So definitely, you know, like planning ahead is so important. Is there any kind of timeline right now as to when this study for potential mitigation options might be undertaken?
So the BRIC-funded microbeach scoping project that's led by OPD, that I think they are trying to start, right now we're in the selecting contractor.
Okay.
So I think the project runs, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 5 years. I forget.
Yeah.
But I actually wanted to add on about that good point with Beach Road. So Beach Road actually has a master plan, a shoreline master plan that was done by our partners, non-government agency called Pacific Coastal Research and Planning.
Okay.
And they did that project plan, and they're actually in the process of trying to do a study about sand sourcing, trying to find sand sources in the lagoon, because they have designs on how they want to enhance Beach Road. So they have, I think, 3 different designs, and the one they want to focus on right now is a quartermaster, where that new traffic light is.
Yes.
Yes. And it's interesting because their design looks at kind of increasing the elevation of that little beach. I think of it as a beach park. We also...
Yeah, there's some exercise equipment there, some picnic tables near the tank.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So one way to kind of mitigate from the storm surge events, they use the data, storm surge data, as well as to see like how high their berms are gonna be. So berms are just like, you know, little hills, right, Kianna?
Of sand. Yeah.
Of sand. So they're looking at doing that, but also part of their design is beach nourishment, so increasing the width. And that's something I think, just like thinking about use, that might be applicable here in the CNMI beach nourishment, just because recreational-wise we like sandy beaches. But of course they come with maintenance and cost.
And cost.
Yeah, cost.
Yeah.
Like Waikiki, for instance, that beach is engineered.
They dredge sand out that's been washed out. They dredge it and process it and bring it back on the beach, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, they have a certain regular maintenance schedule for how they do that. And it's interesting because during the higher wave seasons, you know, you can see that beach experience erosion and how high the water can go in. So it continues to be a challenge, but if we plan ahead, I think we can prepare for a better tomorrow. But that takes a community, and that takes also visions, what we want to see the future look like. But one of the most inexpensive options also that a lot of people might not want to consider is retreat. And retreat just means that you're moving your expensive building away from the coast in so that you can ensure that we're not going to be impacted by the next storm surge event or, high wave coastal flooding event.
Thank you for speaking that reality. It's not something we really want to think about. We want things to go back to the way they were and the problem to be solved and for us to come up with another solution. But that is definitely an option that we should be aware of. Yeah?
Yes.
I want to thank you both for breaking down the science today and really making it applicable to our community here. Any final thoughts before we go?
I just want to encourage everyone, to continue being environmental stewards of our land and sea. Our beaches are very valuable to us in the CNMI recreationally, economically, and I just encourage you guys to enjoy the beach we have right now and also be active, proactive in it, do beach cleanups, but also be observant of, your surroundings. So that when change happens, you can think about what your visions are for the future. Coastal zone management is challenging, but when we have a proactive community that has, that is involved, it's much more easier for the planning to take place. So I just encourage everyone to think about that, and that's why I'm always very invigorated when I have fresh new minds,
enthusiastic.
Yes, and interns. They are the next future of environmental stewards.
Thank you.
Kianna?
Closing thought. Well, I mirror your sentiments. I also think it's very important to get yourself involved in efforts that are environmental but also intrinsically humanitarian, as we've spoken about before. I also think it is very important that people get more involved in the political scene of the CNMI and make sure that they're using their vote to make changes within the political sphere that could positively affect the environments. And not really taking things at surface level when it comes to efforts that do involve conservation, but kind of looking deeper into that and seeing how it would affect Indigenous communities, in part when you're relinquishing lands, especially for conservation. Because there might be things in there that you might not agree with and that might not really ring true to truly conserving the environment.
Mm-hmm. I like that. It's almost like you're saying like everybody needs to be involved with environmental conservation in our community. It's not like Kianna's thing.
Right.
It's like it should be a thing for all of us.
Yes, it really is. Even if you don't think that you are involved in it, you are definitely involved in it. And it doesn't necessarily come out to you being your fault if something in the environment happens that is negatively affecting everybody else, but we each carry a burden, and Earth is a group project, as Christopher once told me.
Aww.
So you have to carry your weight and ensure that everything that you're doing is aligned with your values, especially when it comes to conservation and environmental issues.
Thank you for that, and thank you both for sharing today.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. This has been a very terrifying experience, but also one very positive. I feel like it'll make me grow in the future. So thank you so much.
Definitely. We look forward to your next interview. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you.
Our guests today have been Mary Fem Urena. She's a coastal planner with the Division of Coastal Resources Management, and also Kianna Reyes, Northern Marianas College student and a student intern with the Shoreline Monitoring Program, talking about the program and its effect on our community and our responsibility to be a part of the solution. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.